I'm here with Dr. Francisco Gilwhite, Rabbi Natan DeKaber. We were with President Javier Milei a few minutes ago, and Milei said something that I want to ask them about because it could be contradictory. Milei stated that
when fair policies are designed, those policies are efficient. That is to say, justice and efficiency are two sides of the same coin. So the dilemma they usually present to us as if those things were in conflict is false.
if there is freedom, there is justice, as they are interconnected. I want to ask if freedom can ever contradict justice. For example, what does Milei say about the market? If there is a free market, justice is achieved, as it leads to justice. However, I think there are situations where they can conflict, and sometimes one must be set aside for the other to exist. Well, first I would have to know what justice is. How do we define it? I think justice is when people get what they deserve. That's the broader definition of justice. In Marxism, which is the ideology that Milei is criticizing, they tell us that everyone deserves to have the same. But they never explain why. Why does everyone deserve to have the same? In libertarian philosophy, what we say is that the one who works more and does more deserves more, and the one who works less and does less deserves less. So when you give people the freedom to choose and to make their own decisions and to be responsible for themselves, well, it's easier for people to get what they deserve than when the state imposes the same condition on everyone. And I believe that is consistent with the values of the Torah that Milei invoked. Once you eat the forbidden fruit, in the opening story of Genesis at the very beginning of the Torah, what they're telling us is that each one of us has the power to choose between good and evil. That is, each one of us is individually responsible. And that means that the decisions you make are your fault or to your credit. And you deserve the consequences.
¿No? Ahora,
Now, of course, it's possible that something happens to you that you don't deserve. That is, someone forces an outcome on you that has nothing to do with what you decide for yourself. That can also happen, and that's an injustice. But there we have Rabbi Gidl the Elder, who gave us the central framework for human behavior based on the Torah. He told us, "What you hate, do not do to your fellow." In short, don't impose on your neighbor, and guess what? That's the core principle of libertarianism that Milei defends. If you don't do to your neighbor what you hate, that is the principle of non-aggression. And libertarianism is based on the principle of non-aggression. So, if we combine two things, the principle of non-aggression and the principle of individual responsibility, which is eating the forbidden fruit, from then on, you are individually responsible. What are you responsible for? Simply not harming your neighbor. You're responsible for that. Ethics means not harming your neighbor. So I believe that this freedom is synonymous with justice. Because when you use your freedom to protect your neighbor, you are being just. When you use your freedom to harm your neighbor, you are being unjust. So yes, we obviously need courts. We need a system of law so that when people use their freedom to harm their neighbor, there has to be a correction to restore the neighbor and punish the one who caused harm. I don't see any contradiction.
Although, yes, there is a kind of freedom that causes injustice.
Sure.
But the principle of justice is not at odds with the principle of freedom. That won't happen. Okay, no, but maybe for me, I start a little more from the standpoint of justice. For me, justice is directly based on a moral code, which is that not all actions are the same. So, the principle of morality is that the action of picking up the phone is not the same as hitting someone in the face. That is, each action has its own weight. So if we say, as Milei is arguing, that this law needs to be divine, he bases everything on a Judeo-Christian foundation, the Bible. So that's what has to bring the public, the civil society together. So from there, freedom has to be given. Freedom begins when there is a commandment in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, God gave man freedom at the moment he gave him freedom of choice by telling him this is allowed and this is not. That is what gives man freedom. So, for me, if there is justice and justice is divine, or it is based on this code of justice, well, the 10 Commandments that Milei also talked about. So, for me, that has to give man freedom because he will know exactly what to do and what not to do. And based on this fulfillment or lack thereof, then it will be applied, let's say, it will give him freedom or full use of his freedom. Free will to the citizens, and it will deprive of freedom those who do not know how to use it, their responsibility. Although in the Torah, freedom was not taken away. Yes, that's what I thought. That's why he calls it a foundation. It's about knowing good and bad, which you already do. The Torah says, this is good and that is bad. Now, what are the legal codes going to be? Also, the Torah, within what would be the Noahide principle, provides courts of justice. Each place must set up its own courts of justice to apply penalties. You're not going to say that now abortion is going to be allowed. You're not going to play with values that are rooted in the Torah. The Torah already said it for you, so you're going to be free. The Torah, yes, the Torah says the Jewish people were born, the people of Israel were born, according to Raza de Agaon, at the moment they were given the legal code, right, in the Torah. So what happens is that the freedom of Passover culminates at Mount Sinai. That's the culmination. When a human being knows how to follow the law, that's when he is truly free. That's why it says, Al Tikra al Charut, El al Charut, it says, I give you the tablets of the law. Don't read these as tablets that are engraved, but as engraved words. It says Sharut. Don't read it as engraved, but as liberated. These are the tablets of freedom. Fulfilling them makes you free.
About Milei's argument that he, starting from what they call the 10 Commandments, he explains how they are the foundation for the world to reach a state of abundance. And he begins to say, well, you shall not kill, because life leads you to social order. Do not steal if the government does not steal. And he develops this there, you'll see. And what I liked the most was the first one, where he said, I am God who brought you out of Egypt. That is not a commandment, that's not a prohibition, but rather a proclamation. That the one who gives freedom is God, and the consequence of having that freedom that God gives is to create a world of justice.
In Judaism, the first commandment is not an order in the strict sense, it's a declaration. It's in the book of Shemot, that is Exodus, in the Parasha Yitro, and it says, I am the eternal your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Shemot 22. God doesn't begin with a prohibition, He begins with an act of liberation. He presents Himself as the one who breaks the chains, as the one who brings man out of slavery. That is the foundation of everything that follows. Before telling man what he cannot do, God reminds him who made him free. Freedom is not a human achievement, it is a divine gift.
But Jacob, I learned from my friend Joel Katz, who works with me at Management of Reality, that we can interpret that as a commandment. Because when God says, I am the Lord, your God, you can interpret it as, I am the Lord, your God, and you deal with it. In other words, the commandment is, I am your Lord, you have to accept me as your Lord. That's one way to interpret it. Under that interpretation, it's a commandment, but without someone giving the command, there is no commandment. Of course, he says, I am your God. That's why it's the proclamation. There has to be a judge who establishes yes, but he is the judge. So an interpretation of that doesn't sound like a commandment. It doesn't have the linguistic form we normally expect from a commandment, but he's not asking you. He's telling you, I am the Lord your God. So you can interpret it as the commandment to accept him as your Lord. I'm ordering you to accept me as your Lord God, right? Because he's not asking you. I want to be the Lord, your God. No, the Lord doesn't ask you. That's why. So yes, you can interpret it as the commandment to accept God as your Lord. I like that interpretation. I had never considered it before.
Y yo tenía...
And I had the opposite position. I had the position, exactly. I had the same position as you. I used to say for years I've said that's not a commandment.
And live, I convinced you?
Live. A live video, I introduced myself to her and I said, oh, look. The argument makes sense.
It's part of intellectual honesty.
It's wise to change your mind. Yeah, I haven't seen it much. It's epic. Epic.
Incredible, Joel.